But I just love these things he has. I have witnessed a case of their medicines. The king of the Franks had a treasurer named Bernard. May Allah curse him. Was one of the most accursed and wicked of the Franks. A horse kicked him in the leg, which was infected and opened in 14 different places. Let's see, that's not the one I wanted to read you. They brought before me a knight whose leg had an abscess had grown, a woman afflicted with imbecility. To the knight I applied a small poultice until the abscess opened and became well. And the woman I put on a diet and made her humour well. Then a Frankish physician came to them and said, "This man knows nothing about treating them." He then said to the knight, "Which would thou prefer, living with one leg or dying with two?" The latter replied, "Living with one." The physician said, "Bring me a strong knight and a sharp axe." The knight came with an axe, and I was standing by. Then the physician laid the leg of the patient on a block of wood and bade the knight strike his leg with the axe and chop it off with one blow. Accordingly, he struck it. While I was looking on, one blow, but the leg was not severed. He dealt another blow. Upon the marrow the leg flowed, and the patient died on the spot. He then examined the woman and said, "This is a woman in whose head there is a devil, which has possessed her. Shave off her hair." Accordingly, they shaved it off, and the woman began once more to eat the ordinary diet, garlic and mustard. Her imbecility took a turn for the worse. The physician then said, "The devil has penetrated her head." He therefore took a razor, made a deep and a cruciform incision on it, peeled off the skin in the middle of the incision until the bone of the skull was exposed, rubbed it with salt. The woman also expired instantly. Thereupon I asked them whether my services were needed any longer. When they replied in the negative, I returned home, having learned of their medicine what I did not know before. he portrays them as such brutes that it's quite, really quite staggering. I don't have time to read all that to you, but I really urge you to read it. It's some of the funniest sections there. If I have some time later on, I will look at this. Let's take a look here at Ibn Hazm here. It's in the chapter called the Dolce Vita, I think it's called. I have trouble following it in this book here, so I think I will pick up my Arberry book here and do it from my own book, if I can find it. Oh yes, here it is. This is really the height of Muslim Spain, and there are two selections, one in the Arberry and one in the Kritzeck one. And this book is by a writer called Ibn Hazm. It's another example of the adab style. But the adab style come to very high fruition. This is on page 164. The author of this book is as surprising as the book itself. He was Ibn Hazm, a very learned Muslim theologian. The name of this book is called The Ring of the Dove. Now this Ibn Hazm was actually also a theologian. He was a very strict legal scholar. He had a school of law, very much like the Wahhabis. And yet he could write, and this is the 1000s, the 11th century, a book that is so sensitive that it fairly takes your breath away on love. This is a book about love. Now, if you know the history of European poetry and things like that, in southern France, amore became the motif of the troubadour singers of southern France. And that was in the 12th century, 11th and 12th century, 1200s and 1300s. And that moved into Italy, and new poets in the 13 and 1400s, which was called by them the sweet new style, were also writing about love. And courtly love became the rage in Europe in 12, 13, and 1400s. And you see, it starts with people like Ibn Hazm in Spain in the 1000s. So really, what we consider European courtly love, the Dante-type poetry about Beatrice, and the Divine Comedy, and things of that kind, really begin with treatises like this in Spain, in the height of the Umayyad Empire, before it was taken over. And in fact, it's in the process of this that the Berbers come in from North Africa to help protect the Umayyad Caliphate and then basically take it over. That this is written, and some of the pathetic stories he talks about take place. And what he's describing here is the art of courtship, sorrows and love, and a lot of anecdotes related to it. He was a high-placed court official, and so he knew what he was talking about. And what he does is he wanted to chronicle love of all kinds. For instance, I have observed women, 165, and got to know their secrets to an extent almost unparalleled. For I was reared in their bosoms and brought up among them, and not knowing any other society, I never sat with men until I was already a youth, and my beard had begun to grow. Women taught me the Koran, to get an idea of sociology of that period. They recited to me the poetry. They trained me in calligraphy. My only care and mental exercise since I first began to understand anything had been to study the affairs of women, investigate their histories, acquire the knowledge, all knowledge I could about them. So, in the process of the Berbers coming in, there's some notes here. Ibn Hazm had to flee Cordoba, where he was born. This is 1013, and he writes the next section after that about what's going on in Cordoba and so on. But if we move over to 167, he flees to other cities in Spain, Almira and so on. And then in 168, he gives you the divisions of this book. True to the scholastic tradition in which he was brought up, Ibn Hazm divided his treatise into 30 chapters. This is love. 10 are the root principles of love. The first being followed by the signs of love. After those who fall in love while asleep, those who fall in love from a description, those who fall in love at first sight. Then the second section, very Aristotelian, the accidents of love. And it has to do with helping friend, union with the beloved, concealing love's secrets, divulging the secret, compliance, opposition, all very courtly. And the third part, 6 chapters on the misfortunes of love. The spy, the slanderer, breaking off, separation, forgetting. It's incredible to someone in the Middle Ages could write such a sensitive treatise on such a subject. And it shows you how high Islam had risen as a culture at that time. Where's my critic today? Where is she? All the time I do sensitive things, she never is here. And then when something controversial comes up, then I get browbeaten for it. I really feel bad about that because the balance of the course is missed by people who only come occasionally. And I really feel that's the people who need it the most have a balanced view of things seem to evaporate, which I feel is really not the way to pursue an academic subject. But I think that way. Okay, here's Aristotelianism on 169. Aristotle was the philosopher of causes, first causes, and causality. Every love affair must have an original cause. I want to discuss the most unlikely cause of love. And he tells a story then. One day I visited our friend Abu al-Sari Ammar ibn Sayyid, the freedman of Al-Muwayyad. Who's Al-Muwayyad? He would be one of the Umayyad caliphs, one of the last caliphs. So he would be a servant of the caliph in Cordoba. Found him deep in thought and much preoccupied. And I tried to find out what was bothering him. And finally he said, look, he said, I saw in a dream a young woman. And on awakening, I found I had lost my heart to her, and I was madly in love with her. And now I'm in the most difficult straits with this passion I have conceived for her. Finally, I scolded him, and I said, look, it's a big mistake to occupy yourself with as something as unreal and to attach your fantasy to a non-existent being. Do you know who she is? No, I have no idea. Really, I said, you are very little judgment. Your discretion has been affected. Anyway, so he remonstrates with him, and finally he gets him to forget. So there's something about falling in love in a dream. Now, this is another great story. The next one is falling in love at first sight. It's from the poet Yusuf ibn Harun, another poet known at that time, obviously to them, better known as al-Ramadi. He was one day passing the gate of the perfumers in Cordoba. I've been to Cordoba, it's still a beautiful town. A place where ladies were wont to congregate, when he saw a young lady, this is like Dante now, who he said, entirely captured my heart. This is how Dante encounters Beatrice 300 years later in the Divine Comedy. So you see, I don't think Dante is original in that he's already preceded by this kind of love narrative. And he sees this young lady. He's totally captivated. And by the way, the servants, slaves, whatever you want to call them, are not really looked upon as lesser beings. They're just not in a very good economic state and are tied economically to someone. So I think that the treatment of their so-called slaves, servants, is not a cruel sort of treatment. They're part of the community. These could be a slave as well as a freed woman. It doesn't matter at all. And all my limbs were penetrated by love for her. So he turned aside from the mosque and followed her across the bridge to a place known as Arberry. She reached the mausoleum of the Banu Marwan. Now, you've done enough of this class now with me to know, who are the Banu Marwan? What happened to the Umayyad dynasty after the death of Muawiyah's son, Yazid? Marwan, his secretary, took over because there were no offspring, and all the future Umayyad caliphs were known as the sons of Marwan. So the Umayyads in Spain are the Banu Marwan, the sons of Marwan. That would mean these are the mausoleum of the Umayyad rulers in Spain. God have mercy on their souls. It was erected over their graves in the cemetery of Arberry, and she observed me following her. And she went up to me, or him rather, why are you walking behind me? And he told her how smitten he was. Have done with that. Do not seek to expose me to shame. You will not achieve your purpose. You will not gratify your desire. I am satisfied merely to look on you. The Dante-Beatrice relationship, he said, that is permitted you, she replied. Then he asked her, my lady, are you a free woman or a slave? I'm a slave. You see, even though she's a slave, she's free. And what is your name? Halwa, she told him. And to whom do you belong? By Allah, you are likely to know what inhabits the seventh heaven. Then the answer to that question, seek not the impossible. See, he treats her like a lady. It's not as if she's an inferior being. My lady, he begs, where may I see you again? Where you saw me today, at the same hour every Friday. Now go off, or shall I? You go off. You go off is what it should hear, he replied. And she passed the bridge, and he came after her, but he could not see where she went. I have frequented the perfumes gate in Rabat from then until now, but I have never come upon any further news of her. And I know not whether the heavens devoured her or whether the earth swallowed her up, and the feelings I have in my heart on her account are hotter than burning coals. This is the Halwa, whose name he celebrates, this poet, in his love lyrics. Well, that's Dante. That's Dante 300 years later. I say, so what? Well, I just think it's really interesting that this is already happening in Islamic Spain. I wish the Islamic world, frankly, were like this today, honestly. I think that if the Islamic world were like this today, it would be a happier place, and the world would be a happier place, and we'd be with some extremely sensitive, civilized people. I don't think Muslims themselves know how sensitive and civilized their culture was, frankly. And that's why I really honestly feel it's worth reading this, whether you're a Westerner or an Easterner, so that you can learn what a high culture was and what may be perhaps better to strive towards than sitting in a cave out in Afghanistan someplace. wishing destruction on the whole universe. It seems to me that this is something exquisite and tremendously admirable for any culture. Say, oh, you just want, you know, cigar store Muslims, like you used to want maybe Indians. No, I don't. I appreciate civilized people wherever you find them, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, or atheist. The person is civilized, they're civilized. And this is extremely civilized material, I think you'll agree. I indeed marvel, 171, how profoundly all those tend to fall in love at first sight. That's how I feel too. I can't believe that people can fall in love at first sight. I cannot easily prevail upon myself to believe their claim and further consider such love as merely a kind of lust, as for thinking that sort of attachment can really possess the innermost heart. So this is Ibn Hazm being philosophical, and quite modern, as you see. And penetrate the veil of the soul's recess, I cannot, under any circumstance, credit. Now, you see, this is adab literature risen to really very great heights. Love has never truly gripped me, my inside, save after a long time, constant companionship with the person concerned. And you see, this can be male or female, sharing with him all that while my every occupation, be it earnest or frivolous. So it can be male or female, and obviously he's not going to be able to share much time in this environment with a female person. And he also gives one of his poems here. I don't think his poems are in translation do much. Now, union. The first device employed, 172, for those who seek union is to disclose their feelings. I know a man who commenced his declaration of love by quoting to his lady some verse of his own composition. So, the union with the beloved. Now, as it turns out, as we're moving into Sufism, Islamic mysticism, which is mostly expressed in poetry, some treatises, but mostly poetic treatises, the Sufi is looking also for union. And what the Sufi does, Sufi is the word in Islam for mystic. I guess we didn't read that thing. I should have go back and read it after this. I'll do that from Jais about the two ascetics or mystics who come into the town and see the ostrich. We'll go back and look at that momentarily after I finish Ibn Hazm. But no one knows what the word Sufi comes from. They think the word Suf in Arabic is wool, the woolen garment they may have worn, like a Buddhist might have worn a saffron robe. But it's not clear what it actually means. But the mysticism is fairly clear. It's a kind of Neoplatonic Gnosticism. What they're looking for is union with the one. It's all in Neoplatonism earlier. Jewish Kabbalah has it too. It's rising to higher and higher spheres of intellectuality until through contemplation, meditation, like in Hinduism and Buddhism, you go out of your body and you don't exist as a being anymore. So since you don't exist as a being anymore, you're not perishable, you're not physical. People think mysticism has to do with religious thinking. No, it's not. It's a process. We call it mysticism. It's a process by which you leave your body and become one with the world soul, or with the oneness of the being directing the universe. So the Sufi, since he's all one with God, as it were, he is no longer himself, and he no longer will die. I personally think it's rubbish, not rubbish in the sense of not being impressive, rubbish in the sense that I don't think it's a possible state of achievement. But I do think the people who express it are not rubbish by any means. They express it in really elegant and attractive and high-minded, beautiful terms. I think the same in Jewish Kabbalah. I just don't credit that form of existence. The same for Hinduism, though I think meditation is useful in disciplining the body and disciplining the soul. But to think that you don't exist anymore, that you become one with some other universe force, and therefore you're not going to experience death, is another attempt to escape death. Unfortunately, I don't think there is any way to escape death. That's the sad thing that we may have discovered in our life. But these people who try, though, do develop very elegant forms of doing so. And mysticism is one of those forms. So when you deny the body, you release the soul, they think. And this has to do with assuming that the body and the soul are different, that there is a soul-body split. And everyone, from the Greeks to the modern period, Christianity included, Hinduism included, always thought that the soul was made of different stuff than the body. I think what we've come to see is that the soul and the body are inseparably the same. And, you know, when one disappears, the other disappears, unfortunately. There is no world where the souls exist without the body. People may think there is, and that's fine if they do, if it comforts them. But it's a way of seeking comfort for the reality, the horrible reality of what's going to happen to everything and everyone, unfortunately. So I don't mean to be prosaic. So I'm not saying this is rubbish in the sense that it doesn't have beauty and grandeur. I'm saying that the idea that it can be, to me, is not an idea that I would feel is credible. Anyway, he's talking here about union, and the Sufis in Islam were seeking union too. So often things were spiritualized. So for instance, when the Jews in their mystic processes were trying to explain why the Song of Songs of Solomon was put into the Bible, the rabbi said, oh, well, that's a spiritual love song to God. It's not really a love song to a woman. Well, I don't think the Song of Songs of Solomon is a spiritual love song to God. It's a very fleshy, earthy, lustful song about loving women, and I don't think there's any other dimension to it. But that's how they saw it in the Middle Ages. That you could express the love of God through picturing two lovers. One of the reasons for that, and I know this is getting very abstruse, is that Aristotle, in his metaphysics that everybody was reading, even though we don't read it anymore, they were all reading it. I think it may be useful to read Aristotle as far as organizing one's thinking. Aristotle was responsible for our universities, the compartmentalizing of subjects, the treating of knowledge in a systematic fashion is what he was interested in doing. So he organized the subjects upon which our universities are based. And metaphysics means what? He couldn't put it in words. He didn't have a word for it, so we called it metaphysics. What does metaphysics literally mean? No, that's not what it literally means. That's what it's come to mean. What does it literally mean? The book beyond physics. Physics deals with the bodies in the universe, bodies at rest, bodies in motion, and the way things behave in a physical way. But there's another book beyond physics that you said is philosophy, is metaphysics. The book, that's what it literally means. The book, which has no name, the book he wrote beyond physics, which dealt with first causes, first things. The primal cause, the cause of all causes that we call God, the philosophers call it the first cause. And Aristotle then portrayed this picture of the universe, how the first cause moves things, because the universe is in motion. Planetary bodies are in motion, human beings are in motion, animals are in motion, the moon is in motion, the earth, the stars, everything's in motion. The ancients had a view of how things moved, and Aristotle said that things moved the way a lover moves, the way the lover moves, the way the beloved moves the lover. That's the way the universe moves, like love. Well, Christians, everyone loved Aristotle because everyone loves love. So his presentation of the way the universe moved being based on love was picked up in Christianity as the way they presented their essence, you know, of love. And you're supposed to love everyone, and I never met a Christian who loved everybody. And in fact, a lot of Christians hate people. So, but they go to church and talk about Jesus and so on and so forth. But the Christians are some of the most warlike nations in the world. In fact, at the moment, they are the most warlike nations in the world. So, I mean, I don't know about all this love, except as a superficial tactic of way of talking about the universe. I don't think anyone really practices it. I don't think anyone can practice it in the way it's portrayed. It's an ideal. But anyway, forget what I think. The point being that love suited Christianity and a lot of other religions, and it suited Sufism too. And they loved this idea that the universe was moved by love. and that the stars and the planets were moved by love. What was Aristotle trying to express when he said that, I think? What Newton was calling gravity. You see, he didn't have a word for gravity. Maybe love is a better word for gravity. But, you know, gravity really is what Newton was talking about, love. Everything is moved on the basis of gravity. You know, there is some mysterious force that's in the bodies of things that influence other bodies elsewhere in an unseen manner, the way love moves a lover. So Newton was really, it was an early theory of gravity that he was expressing in terms of love. Well, which do you prefer, Newton's word gravity or Aristotle's word love? Anyway, the mystics and Sufis picked it up, and we're starting to get it here because Ibn Hazm has some physicality, but there's also some Sufi love going through here. So he's talking about the union of lovers, and sometimes it isn't clear whether he's talking about union with God, union with the divine, or just union with lovers, because he gets so carried away by it that one wonders if he's really talking about physical love. So here, I know of a youth and a girl, 173, who were very much in love with each other. In the course of one of the interviews with her, the young man made a slightly improper suggestion. At this, the girl exclaimed, "Well, I shall make a public complaint against you, put you to shame." Some days later, the girl found herself in the company of great princes and leading statesmen. Present also were a great number of women, of servants, against whom it would be well to be on one's guard. The youth in question was in the concourse, for he was on the entourage of the master of ceremonies. Other singing girls besides were in attendance. When it came to her turn to sing, she tuned her lute and chanted the following words. So she obviously embarrassed him with this poem. Lovers, for the most part, employ as their messengers to the beloved either a humble or insignificant fellow to whom nobody will pay any attention because of his youthful or scruffy look or untidy appearance, or a respectable person of whom no sort of suspicion would attach on account of the piety or because of their advancement in years. Women, too, are frequently used, especially those hobbling on canes, or who carry beads, or wrapped in red cloaks. You get a good picture of society back then. I remember how in Cordoba young women had been put on guard against such types whenever they might happen to see women plying a trade or a profession, and here you get the professions, which give them ready access to people, are popular with lovers. The lady doctor, the bloodletter, the peddler, the broker, the coiffeuse, the professional mourner, the singer, the soothsayer, the schoolmistress, the errand girl, the spinner, the weaver. That's about everybody, it seems, huh? They could be convenient to employ a person who is closely related to the beloved and will therefore not be begrudged admittance. How many an inaccessible maiden has proved approachable by messengers such as this? Further along. I was once well acquainted with a man of Cordoba, the son of a principal clerk of the civil service. His name was Ahmed ibn Fat. And I always knew him as a circumspect, keen student of science and letters, and reserved, excellent with his companions, great dignity. He was never to be seen but in the most virtuous circles. His conduct was beyond reproach. Kept to himself. Then the fates decreed that we should be separated because of the political dislocation of the time. The first news that came to me after I had taken up residence in this other town called, I don't know where this is, Yativa, was that he had cast off all restraints, and this is man-to-man love here, on falling in love with a certain goldsmith's son called Ibrahim ibn Ahmad. I knew this young man well enough to be aware of his qualities did not merit his being loved by a person of good family, such as the one I was describing. Then I had it confirmed that my friend had uncovered his head, shown his face abroad, cast off his burnous headscarf, bared his countenance, rolled up his sleeves, and had given himself totally over to the lusts of the flesh. But in time, the object of his passion ran away from him altogether. And see, he could have spared himself all these troubles if he just kept far from it all. So he goes on about that sort of thing. Next little episode, 175 at the bottom. One of the wonderful things that occur in love is the way the lover submits to the beloved. So all these incredible sensitive things about love in his time. 177, for instance. I've never seen anything equal to the helpfulness of women. They are far more helpful than men in keeping love secret. That is true. Women love to help others in love. in counseling each other to be discreet and in cooperating to conceal it whenever they happen to know of such an affair. I've never in my life known a woman to reveal the secret of a loving couple, except that she was hated, loathed, unanimously condemned by all of her sisters. Old women are even better than young girls in this matter. The latter do sometimes disclose what they know is true out of jealousy, though that happens rarely. Whereas the former old women, who have despaired of further romance, are therefore now anxious solely for the welfare of others. I know of a wealthy woman who possessed many slave girls and servants. It was rumored that one of her maids was in love with a young gentleman, and that they were behaving badly. Your maid, so-and-so, a friend remarked to her, knows all about the affair and is intimate with every detail. The mistress thereupon laid hold of the maid. She was very cruel in punishing her servants and let her sample such a variety of blows and pummelings as even the toughest men could not endure, hoping the girl would disclose something of the matter. But she betrayed nothing. I also know of a great lady who could recite the Koran from one end to the other, pious, devoted to good works. She happened to obtain possession of a letter written by a boy to his lady love. The boy was the property of a different household. The grand lady let the young man know that she was aware of the romance. He sought to deny everything, but that was impossible. She said to him, "What ails you? Who has ever been immune from love? Don't worry. I would not tell anyone. If I could only buy you for her as my property, even if it took all that I possess, I would gladly do so and put her at your disposal somewhere that you could come to her without anyone being the wiser." 178. As for this reason, why this instinct is so deeply rooted in women, I see no other explanation than they have nothing else to fill their minds except loving union. There's that idea of union again. And then further down, more about union, which, as I said, is the mystic idea of union with the one God. One of the significant aspects of love is union. Look at how he describes it. This is a lofty fortune, exalted rank, a sublime degree, a lucky star named more, it's life renewed, pleasure supreme, joy everlasting, grand mercy with all. It sounds like much more than the physical act of love, doesn't it? I don't think the physical act of love could be described in such terms. I don't know if you've experienced it or not, but I don't think it has that kind of, well, I don't think it has that kind of immensity. It is pure happiness without alloy, the perfect realization of hopes, complete fulfillment of dreams. Well, either this guy is nuts or he's talking about something else. And it may be he's talking about the union of the Sufi with the divine, which sounds to me what he's getting into here. Nothing affects the way that does. Neither intimacy with princes, wealth, not finding after lacking, returning after long absence, security after repose. None of these things so powerfully affects the soul as union with the beloved, especially if it comes after long denial and continual banishment. That's the courtly love ethic right there. And he continues here. Not lovely are any of these things than union with the well-beloved, whose character is virtuous, laudable, whose disposition, whose attributes are evenly matched in perfect beauty. Hard to tell if we're talking about men or women half the time. Okay, I will let you read the rest of that yourself. That is Ibn Hazm's treatise on love, a wonderful example of adab. I asked you about adab on the final. I expect you to be able to write something about this. Let me go back to Kritzeck material, if I can. We were talking about his sayings about Arabs. This was on page 91. But we didn't do the material on 93 about the two ascetics, which I think is, this is, now we're back in the 800s. What we just read was the 1000s in Spain. This is 800s in Baghdad. Two ascetics entered Aqwas, a town that American soldiers are fighting in today. One went towards the graveyard to satisfy a want of nature. I think that's quite funny, typical of God. He just says it laconically, but what does he mean? You go to the graveyard to go to the bathroom. That's really funny. That's what he thought, because these are ascetic Sufis. They don't think anything of life and death, so they're not interested in life, death. It doesn't exist. That is, death doesn't exist. Dead bodies don't exist. You go there. go to the bathroom. That's a joke. And it's not clear that these are yet Sufis, but ascetics of the Hindu-Buddhist kind even. But you see, asceticism, mysticism, Sufism is moving in even here in the 800s in Baghdad. Anyway, the other sat down near a goldsmith's shop. That's also a funny. You know, this is the same guy that wrote Flies and Mosquitoes, and he's got a funny, puckish sense of humor. Well, ascetics are not supposed to be interested in money. Why would he be sitting near a goldsmith's shop? They're supposed to be interested in poverty. Anyway, a woman came out of one of the big houses with a small box of jewels. And she went to the shop, and when she was walking, she slipped, and the box fell out of her hand. The jewels presumably fell out of the box. There was an ostrich roaming around. I see a good picture of life there, which belonged to some of the people in the neighborhood. And when the box fell, its lid came off, and the contents were scattered, and the ostrich swallowed the largest and most valuable stone of her jewels. All this was seen by the ascetic. Well, the shopkeeper and his workers sprang out and collected the stones and kept the people back with shouts, and so none could approach the place, and missing the jewel, the woman shrieked. Those present made a thorough search and put their heads together, but the stone could not be found. My God, said one of them, no one was near us except this ascetic over here. This is another joke, because it shows their lack of respect for these people. When I first went to India in 1962, I can say that this is how people treated what we can think yogis are very sacred and impressive people. People I met in India just laughed at yogis, almost spit at them, thought they were just loafers and fakers. They'd see one and they were just going to, you know, totally have complete contempt for them as just people, you know, getting by, conning other people and doing nothing useful. And this is how they are looking at Sufis here, you see. Middle-class people, anyway, always behave this way towards people pursuing ascetic activities. Anyway, they saw this ascetic, meaning someone who's interested in spiritual things. That's what ascetic means, in case you didn't know. And they said, yeah, he was the one, he must have it. But of course, he would be the last one to be interested in jewels, theoretically. They questioned him, but he didn't inform them. Why not? Because he's like a Hindu, or Jain, J-A-I-N, who considers all life sacred and won't touch life because of the rebirth. You're being reborn. So it's more like a Hindu mystic here in Iraq at this point. But he wouldn't speak because he knew that the stone was in the ostrich's belly, and therefore they would slaughter it, and he would have had a part in the shedding of blood. This is like a Jain. In India there are Jains, J-A-I-N, who go so far that they won't even step on a bug on the pavement because they feel that, you know, they won't even step on an ant because of this respect for the rebirth process and other things. Respect for life, if you want to call it that. They're vegetarians, of course. And all he would say was, I have not taken anything. And they searched and examined every article of his clothing, and they beat him with fists until his companion came. I could translate this better even without the Arabic. Until his companion came in and asked him, told him what to fear God. And they took him to the crowd, and they started beating him up too. You gave it to him to hide. I'm not giving him anything. And while both were being beaten half to death, a smart man came by and heard the commotion and saw what was going on, and seeing an ostrich roaming around the street, and inquired whether it was there when the jewel fell, and he said, well, yes, it was. Then he said, well, that's the guy you want, the ostrich. Accordingly, compensating the owners of the ostrich, they slaughtered it, and on ripping open its intestine, discovered a stone. In a short time, it had been reduced. See, they thought that, you know, these animals do have stones in their intestines to help them digest food. You know, they do use stones, ostriches and other creatures like us, so they know that much about these creatures. Anyway, when the jewel was there, it had been ground and polished, and the intestine of the ostrich to half its former size, but it had been given such a tint that it was more valuable now than it was when it would have been in its full weight. And he concludes, since the fire of the intestine is different from that of the native snow. Anyway, it's a funny story again from John. But what's interesting is the coming of these mystics are coming into Islam now and changing the whole fabric of what Islam is. And one of the most famous mystics, one of the first mystics, is this one we have here, if I can find him now, Al-Hallaj. Al-Hallaj. He's on page 96 of Kritzeck. Al-Hallaj, the crucifixion of a mystic. Al-Hallaj is beloved in the West. The West love Al-Hallaj because they see him as a kind of Jesus figure. Muslims don't really think much about Al-Hallaj anymore. But this was what Baghdad was like in the 9th century, and I think it's really impressive to see this, or 10th century this is, end of the 9th. And the main, aside from this union idea that I was talking about, union with the beloved, there's this other allied idea which is called in Arabic fun. And next time when we look at the poets, the whirling dervish poet Jalaluddin Rumi, the Persian poets Hafiz, and the famous poet Omar Khayyam, who was mistranslated in the West as eat, drink, for tomorrow you may be married, but these are all basically Sufi poets. Hafiz, there's some doubt about. Hafiz is the national poet of Persia. We'll look at that next time, so you can be reading them if you want. This word fauna is extremely important. It's what the mystic was seeking in his search for union with the divine. Extinction. What does extinction mean? Extinction of the self as a separate person being, like I told you. If you no longer exist, you don't suffer anymore. If you no longer exist, you don't die. If you are no longer you, and you are only part of the one, then you live with the one forever. Now, I told you I don't think this is possible, but it's certainly an elegant thought. I don't think it's possible because I think it's based on a misconception that the body and the soul are separate, and that there is a soul distinct from the body. Now, the ancients assumed the soul was different from the body and distinct from the body, and therefore they all thought like this. Christian mystics, Jewish mystics, Islamic mystics, Hindu mystics. I'll say this about Muhammad and the Hebrew Bible. They're more interested in morality as righteousness goes. They're not so interested in the body-soul split. In fact, in the Hebrew Bible, I don't think you see any indication of a body-soul at all. It's more how you behave in this world towards your fellow neighbor and your fellow man in a righteous, honorable way is what they were after. Not what you're going to enjoy in the afterlife as a result of your whatever you do in this life. Anyway, this is about Al-Hallaj, one of the first Islamic mystics in Baghdad, and his concept of fana, non-existence or extinction. He was ultimately arrested by the Caliph in 922, held prison, well, he was executed in 922. He was held prisoner for a while, and ultimately he was executed in the most cruel manner you could imagine. So, let's look at Al-Hallaj here. Good introduction to Sufism. Now we're out of adab into more mystic poetry. This is a narrative, of course, but it's got poetry in it. These are his followers talking about him somewhat like Christians would talk about Jesus. I saw Hallaj in the Qatiya market. We will assume that's in Baghdad. This is a great line. He was weeping bitterly and crying, "Hide me from God. People, hide me from God. Hide me from God. He took me from myself and has not given me back." You see, mystics like to talk in terms of, I don't think it's riddles, but puzzling expressions. And of course, if you understand what he's talking about, he's in God and he can't come back out of God. Therefore, I cannot perform the service, the prayer and everything that goes with the prayer, or even the Hajj pilgrimage, because, which I should do in his presence, for my fear of his leaving me alone again. I am already in him. I don't want to be alone out of him. I don't want to be separate from him. Therefore, I can't do the Islamic rituals. Well, how would this go down with the average Muslim? Not too good. He will leave me deserted and abandoned, and woe for the man who knows himself outcast after having been in the divine presence. People were weeping to hear him. Not people like it, but like I know there are mosques here in California. They don't even consider Sufism part of Islam. I know the head of the mosque in some, I think, further south from here. I heard them speak once saying Sufism is not Islamic. Well, that's not true. The Sufism played a huge part in medieval Islamic culture. Most of Islam was given over to Sufism by the 1300s, probably for good too. But in the modern period, it's been condemned by these strict Orthodox constructionists who rather want to, chop people's heads off for not doing the right thing or something. Which again, I'm not a Muslim, I can't judge them, but I certainly think these people are more attractive than they are from an outsider's point of view anyway. And if you're a Muslim, you'll have to decide what you think, but I certainly wouldn't condemn these people here. One of the things too, I think, which is lacking in these strict constructions, they don't have a sense of humor. They don't find anything funny. To me, Hajj is funny, entertaining, charming. Charm doesn't exist in that world. What? He's charming, so leave him alone? No. You don't leave alone someone who's charming, you kill them. I think charm and humor and lightheartedness are the marks of civilization and sophistication. And that's what I think has been lost from the medieval period to the modern period with this extremism. That's my own personal belief. But I'm not a Muslim and a Muslim off the side, but I say these things to encourage Muslims to go back to when their culture was really impressive, really high, at least to an outsider. I can't speak for inside people. Hajj is, to my mind, though he may be, you might think he's crazy, he's still pretty impressive intellectual development. I cannot perform the service for fear of leaving me alone again. He will leave me deserted, abandoned, and woe to the man who knows himself outcast after having been in the presence. The people were weeping. Then a lodge stopped by the gate that leads to the Atta Mosque, and then people would listen to him. He began to speak words, some of part which we understood, some of which we didn't. Surely, he said in the clear part, if he create creatures of his, it must be pure goodwill towards it. And if then he blazes upon it sometimes and hides its faith as behind a veil, it's still always that the creature may go onward. If the light never came, men would deny the very existence of God. If it were never veiled, all would be spellbound. That is why we will neither state nor last forever. We will let neither state last forever. For me in this moment there is no veil between him and God, not as much as a wink between me and him. As you know, the veil imagery in Paul's letter to the Corinthians is very strong. He's condemning Moses for putting a veil over his head when he went into the presence of God, or rather when he came out, so that according to the Old Testament, Moses' face was emblazoned with God's light and he would have burned the people up. Of course, it's all good storytelling to some extent, but impressive. And nonetheless, Paul said, no, the reason Moses put a veil over his face was so that the people wouldn't know that the light of the law had gone out. This is polemical arguing on theological points, first letter of the Corinthians. I think that Hajj is talking about similar things with this veil and light that Paul is either criticizing and the mystics were interested in. Some of the poem that he recites here, notice he mentions Moses here on Sinai. So he does understand something about Moses and the veil. I think the Zohar in Judaism is the light on Moses' face and those things. Zohar means splendor, light, from having been in the presence of God. It's my own view of that. That's, I think, what they're up to. I entered unannounced, another thing here. I entered unannounced into Halaj's room one day, says Ibn Fatik, the narrator. Someone who had been in before me, Halaj, was praying, and his brow was pressed to the ground in prayer, and he was reciting the following: O thou whose closeness girds my very skin, whose mystery spurns me far away, all lie all things in time from the eternal. Thou shinest so before me that I think thou art all things, and that thou dost deny thyself in me, etc., etc., etc. Thou art nothing here, as this can neither be thy distance, for that would fortify my selfhood, nor thy closeness, for that would help me, neither thy war, for that would destroy me, nor thy peace, for that would comfort me. All these very things that are said to sort of, I forget the word, mystify you. Then noticing my presence, he said, "Oh, come in, don't disturb me, come on in." So I went further and sat down in front of him. His eyes glowed like burning coals. They were bloodshot. "My dear son," he said, "I hear people are going about saying I am a saint, and others go about saying I am an unbeliever and pious. I prefer those who call me pious. Everything is to shock, you see. And so does God." "Well, why, Master? These people don't like you. They're calling you." Here's why. If a man goes on a pilgrimage and cannot, wait a second, I skipped a page here. They call me a saint because they respect me. But the others call me impious out of zeal for their religion. A man who is zealous for his religion is dearer to me and dearer to God, too, than a man who venerates another person. What would you say, Ibrahim, Fatik, on the day when you see me hanging on the scaffold, gibbet scaffold, and killed and burned? Yet that will be the happiest day of my life. So he foresees, like Jesus in scriptures, why the French particularly like Al-Halaj has been translated into French, whole biographies have been written about him by Christian mystics in France. "Well, don't stay here," he said, "President. Go in the grace of God." And then he speaks about love. "When the giving of love is entire, and love cries to his bygone, and the stress of his crying, then a man verifies what a passion testifies, blah, blah, blah." More of his poetry about love. So love was already being used before Ibn Hazm as expression of something to do with the union with God. Another episode. Halaj went one day into the mosque of al-Mansur and cried, "Gather round, listen what I have to say." I'm sure these are true testimonies. Now, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I think these are truer testimonies of what we'll get in the Gospels, for instance, of what actually happened. If you want an eyewitness account, to my mind, this really is an eyewitness account. I don't think those accounts in the Gospels are as fresh and as impressive in terms of being actual events as this is. Those have the sort of look of being rewritten later through theology often. So, but this is really a testimony of a saint. Halaj went one day in al-Mansur and cried, "Gather round!" I can just see him doing it. "Well, listen what I have to tell." A crowd assembled, lovers, followers, haters, critics. "You should know this," said Halaj. "God has made me your outlaw, kill me!" Just picture him saying that in a crowd of Muslims. "God has made me your outlaw, kill me!" Anything to shock, you see. Now, that's why, personally, I'll give my own view here. I find Halaj extremely entertaining, and I don't think anyone should want to kill him. Because, I mean, it's just ridiculous to want to kill someone like this. He's not hurting anybody particularly. He's challenging and different, interesting, curious. And if one doesn't want to take him seriously, one should have a sense of humor and just have a laugh. If I saw someone out on the campus here saying that, I would just have a good chuckle. I wouldn't want to behead him and burn him up and throw his body into the Tigris River. That's the real problem with orthodoxy and people who are not ordinary people. So, people in the crowd began to weep, but Abdul Wadud, the Sufi, pressed near to him and said, "Sheikh," Sheikh, the leader of the Sufis, was often called Sheikh, "how can we kill a man who prays and fasts and recites the word?" Sheikh said, Lodge, the motive that really stops you from shedding my blood has nothing to do with prayer, fasting, reciting the word. So why not kill me? You will get your reward, and I'll come to my peace. For you it will be jihad, holy war. For me it will be martyrdom. When Lodge left the mosque, said Abdul Wadud, I followed him home and questioned him, Sheikh, what you said troubles me. What did you mean? Dear son, he said, no task is more urgent for the Muslims at this moment than my execution. Realize this, that my death will preserve the sanctions of the law, and he who was offended must undergo them. His preaching went on, and he concluded in a violent attack with the words, and so on and so forth. In any case, the year 301, that was 297. He left Baghdad with disciples, but in 301 he was arrested in Persia, Susa, sent to Baghdad. Evidence was collected in Ahwaz in Baghdad. It's like Saddam's trial now, that he was, and he claimed to be God. He was accused of asserting the deity took up its abode. He had seen another Alid sympathizer, like Johnny's. That the deity, the Imam idea, the incarnation, took up its abode in members of the Alid house. So he's another sort of Shiite, if you like. For the time being, he was committed to imprisonment in the royal palace. But he was still very euphoric and passionate. And he said, I've been exuberant, but now I have the result of my exuberance has now overtaken me. It was not until the year 306, I think it's mistaken what's here, there's no date here, that the affair came to a head. So he was in prison for 5 or 6 years. And all the time he'd been lodged in the palace and allowed to receive visitors, something like Socrates. They were told that his disciples were acting like apostles and declaring that Lodge was God. These persons were arrested and tortured, and under cross-examination they confessed, page 99 here. And they repeated these statements that he was a God, he had the power to raise from the dead, you see, like Jesus. But Lodge repeated what they said. God forbid, he said, that I should pretend to be divinity or to prophesy. I am merely a man who worships God, practices prayer, fasts, and does good works. That is all. But anyway, they found a letter that he'd supposedly written, and they used that as evidence against it. This has to do with the pilgrimage, that if a man can't go on the pilgrimage, top of 100, let him set himself in his house some square construction, touched by no unclean thing. Let him then go around it and perform the rites therein, and so on. This will be a substitute for the pilgrimage. So they used that evidence to show that he was trying to change doctrine. Where did you get that doctrine? He said from Hassan al-Basra's book of, remember we talked about Hassan al-Basra, the free thinker and the philosophic development of thought in Islam. So he says he got it from Hassan al-Basra. So on. Anyway, further along. When Lodge saw what was going on, he cried out, my blood must not be shed like this. They're going to condemn him. You have no right to outlaw me over a quibble of this kind. My religion is Islam. My sect is the true way. There are books of mine maintaining the true way in bookstores. I abjure you in the name of God, do not shed my blood. Now he says, don't shed my blood. Okay, he's fairly changeable, but certainly not someone that I don't think we want to go and execute in a cruel manner. But that's what they did to people in the Middle Ages, both in Christianity and in Islam, as you see. Interestingly, his way, he preaches the way, the true way. The Dead Sea Scrolls have a lot about the way. And I wonder if there's not some material that's connecting all these things up that's floating around. I have no way to show that, but it just seems to me curious that these things keep on reappearing in these areas like this. Anyway, the whole excruciating trial is laid out here. It was agreed the chief of police would come after dark and bring a company of servants and men on mules. so that Elijah should be set on a mule and huddled along the middle of the crowd. On the night before he was delivered up to execution. So it's finally they're going to execute. Elijah stood up and performed the ordinary prayer of 2 bows, 2 rakas. After that he fell to repeating, illusion, illusion, illusion to himself, and continued all night till the night was half spent. Then for a long while he remained silent. Suddenly he jumped up and cried, truth, truth! He bound on his headdress and donned his clothes, stretched out his arms, facing to the direction of Mecca, fell into ecstasy and talked with God. Ibrahim Fatiq, his servant, and I were with him. Both remembered some parts of what he said. So they give his last speech here. See, he said, we are ready to be called as the witnesses and come forth refuge into thy grace, thy splendor, thy glory, thy brightness, thy declaring of whatever thou pleasest in heaven, God on earth. God, O center of cycles, thou wilt come shining to the sight when thou on whom thou wilt, and as thou wilt even thou displays thy decree in the image of the fairest form of Adam. Mr. Perez, you see, there's the primal Adam idea there that all these sectarian groups had. That's why I'm convinced that there's connections. Adam, according to these pseudo-Clementine literature that we have in the Judeo-Christian sectarian tradition, comes and takes on new forms in different people in every generation. Jesus in Paul's, end of Paul's 1 Corinthians is called a second Adam. He said the first Adam was born of the dust. Paul says the second Adam is born of the Spirit, and so on and so forth. It's in 1 Corinthians 15. Anyway, this is going on all through here. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's in a lot of these movements, and here it is in, I'll make a note of it, second Adam here. So I'm convinced there's a connection. We don't have a lot to go on, but and I wouldn't be able to give you what the connection was, but still I think it's really interesting. Anyway, here's the execution. Didn't have enough? We'll get to do the rest of it. When morning dawned, they came to fetch him to the square, page 103. And as we watched him go, this beautiful images here. Do I believe this? Yeah, I do. I think this is what happened. He was dancing in his chains. I believe that's absolutely true. And the crowd gathered, and the day they executed Lodge, they brought him from his cell, bound and chained, but he was laughing. And said, what's wrong with you, the executioner says. And he gives him a verse, I guess, and it has this cup imagery, Mr. Parrott here. He passed me his cup and bade me drink, and I drank, and so on. Anyway, they brought him as far as the scaffold and the nails, and he laughed till tears ran from his eyes. And presently turning to the crowd, he saw Shibli, one of his disciples there. Abu Bakr, have you your prayer? Obviously his name is Abu Bakr. Have you your prayer rug with you? Yes, said Shibli. Will you lay it for me? And Shibli put out his carpet and lodge to perform the prayer of 2 rakas, reciting, we shall try you, and then all souls shall taste death in the second. And I can't remember some of his words, but they were as follows. O our God, who dost glow in the places and art not in thy place, I beseech thee by the truth of thy word, which declares that I am, by the truth of this is my word, which declares that thou art. I beseech thee, my master, give me grace to be grateful for the happiness of thy giving, that thou didst hide from others what thou unveiled to me, the raging fires of thy face, and forbid them to look as I have permitted to look into things hidden in the mystery of thee. I told you about the face, Moses talking to God face to face, the light on the face. I think it's all through here. And these, thy servants are gathered to slay me in zeal of their religion, longing to win their favor. Forgive them, like Jesus on the cross. Forgive them, they don't know what they do. Have mercy on them. Surely if thou hast shown them what thou hast shown me, they would have never done what they are doing. And hadst thou kept from me what thou hast kept from them, I should not have suffered this tribulation. Whatsoever thou wilt do, I praise thee. Whatsoever thou wilt do, I praise thee. Well, he's a totally religious person, however he expressed it. There was silence. The headsman stepped up and dealt him a smashing blow between the eyes. The blood poured from his nostrils. Shibli cried out and rent his dress. The headsman was ordered to administer 1,000 strokes with a scourge. This is the New Testament. It was done. Allah uttered no cry. He didn't plead for pardon. Only according to one witness, when he endured the 600th blow, he cried to the chief of police, "Send for me, and I'll tell you what will more profit the caliph than the storming of Istanbul, Constantinople." We expected such an offer, said Nazub, the chief of police. "It won't get you out of this scourging." And after that, Alaj said nothing more till the 1000th blow came at last. His hand was amputated, then his foot. He was fastened on the cross or the scaffold, and he hung there till nightfall, when an order arrived from the Caliph Muqtadir to give permission for his beheading. However, the offer in charge was late, and he said, "Leave it till tomorrow morning." I left him there all night like this. When morning came, he was taken down, dragged forward for decapitation. It was at this time he spoke his last words. "All who have known ecstasy long for this. The loneliness of the only one, alone with the alone." And then he was a little way from the front of the scaffold. His head was struck off. His body rolled in a strip of reed matting, soaked in kerosene and burnt. And I was standing up as tall as I could, said Clerk Gibbons, Anji, and I had not been able to get into the square. The trunk, his body twisted in the flames as it burned, and when there was nothing left but ashes, they were collected and thrown from the minaret into the Tigris River. We all know where that is now. The head was set up on the bridge for 2 days and then sent to Khorasan, eastern Iran, to be exhibited in various districts, and the booksellers summoned to appear and obliged to take an oath they would neither sell nor buy any book by Halaj. His disciples asserted the person who endured the scourging was not but some enemy. That's in the Nag Hammadi text about Jesus. But some enemy of his on whom his likeness had been cast, that Jesus didn't die on the cross, and another person died instead in the Gnostic text from Nag Hammadi. Some of them even claim to have seen him afterwards, like we get the New Testament, and to have heard something from him to that effect, along with more nonsense not worth the trouble of transcribing. Well, that is one killer piece, don't you think? That's a real tough piece. I think it actually happened. You say, "Why are you reading that, Professor Eisenman? That's not Islam." Oh, yes, it is Islam. It's part of the culture of Islam, the good, the bad, and the beautiful. It's some marvelous high things, some other things. And the brutality of human beings is the same whether it's Islam, Christianity, Judaism, or what have you. People behave oddly towards things they don't understand. They behave out of fear and violently often. And I think Halaj is something quite exquisite, certainly not threatening. It's something that you should actually prize rather than treat in that brutal manner. In Islam, it didn't make as big an impression as Jesus made in Christianity, but you see the parallel. Next time, we'll do Sufi poetry that picks up from here in the next centuries, 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. And we'll read Rumi, who you may have heard of, the Whirling Dervishes, and I'll tell you about the final next time. Okay? Sorry to keep you guys. Oh, heck, where you go? We got a couple more minutes here. And I finished on Halaj. It's a good place to stop. But any questions you have on this? Anything you want to say? What do you think of Halaj? Huh? Think it's crazy? Anyway, it's Sufism. It's Sufism, Islam mysticism, justly interesting and very fascinating to Westerners who study Islam. Not so much to Muslims these days.